The morning I realized my HOA had turned my front yard into a public event space, I was standing in my kitchen, barefoot, half awake, holding a cup of coffee that suddenly didn't taste like anything. I looked out the window and saw a bounce house on my grass, folding tables near my fence, smoke from a grill drifting toward my porch, and strangers laughing like they had every right to be there. Nobody had called me. Nobody had asked. They had just decided my land was convenient. And that was enough for them. That was the moment it hit me. Some people don't need to own what's yours to start acting like they do. My name is Garrett Whitfield, and I'd lived on that corner lot outside Clarksburg, West Virginia, since 2009. I bought the place with years of railroad work, a little money my father left behind, and a whole lot of stubbornness. The house wasn't fancy, but the land meant everything to me. It was peace. It was proof I had built something solid with my own two hands. So when somebody treated it like spare community property, it didn't just make me angry. It felt personal. The neighborhood used to be decent, quiet, friendly enough, not too nosy. Then Dolores Fitch became HOA president, and everything changed. Dolores was a retired county clerk with pastel blazers, sharp little glasses, and the energy of a woman who had waited her whole life to tell other adults what color their mailbox post should be. She even brought a gavel to meetings, which should tell you all you need to know. Once she took over, the fines started falling like rain. Paint too chipped, trash bin too visible, weeds too tall, decorations not approved. Small stuff, constant stuff, just enough to remind everyone who thought she was in charge. The first real line she crossed came in early 2019. I came home from visiting my sister and found deep tire tracks carved into my front yard, well inside my fence line. My neighbor Dale told me the HOA had used my lot for overflow parking during one of their events. Just sent cars right onto my property, like it belonged to the neighborhood. No heads up, no apology, no offer to repair the damage. I brought it up at the next HOA meeting. Dolores looked at me over the top of her glasses and said my property was adjacent to the common easement, and the board had every right to use it. Now, even before I checked the paperwork, I knew that sounded like nonsense. But there's a special kind of rage that comes from hearing somebody say something false with total confidence, like their tone alone can make it true. So I went home and started digging. Deeds, plat maps, HOA covenants, county records, everything. And there it was. The easement was real, but it was narrow and specific, 4 feet from the designated common area, strictly for drainage, utilities, and maintenance. That was it. Not for parking, not for parties, not for turning my yard into the neighborhood's free event lot. I documented everything. Photos, measurements, dates. I got an estimate for repairing the lawn damage, $420. Then I sent a formal letter to the HOA citing the exact section they had violated. Dolores wrote back with one of the most insulting phrases I've ever read on paper. She said the board found no violation and that community spirit depended on neighbors contributing to shared events. Community spirit. That was her way of saying my property was apparently a donation I didn't know I was making. When I pushed back again, I got hit with a $75 fine for an unapproved structure, which turned out to be a wooden bench I had built years earlier and kept near the creek. That was when I stopped thinking of this as petty HOA nonsense and started seeing it for what it was, retaliation. So I did what angry people usually don't do, which is maybe why it worked. I got organized. I kept a notebook in my kitchen drawer and wrote down everything. Dates, letters, fines, conversations. My father used to say if somebody wants to play games, you make them play against a record. I didn't know it then, but that little notebook was going to matter. For a few months, things were quiet. Then at the August HOA meeting, Dolores announced a fall harvest festival, bounce houses, barbecue, petting zoo, live music, to be held along the creek corridor and the adjacent corner properties. There was only one corner property next to that creek, mine. I raised my hand. She ignored me. Meeting over. The next morning, I called an old friend named Bo Hadley, a semi-retired real estate attorney I'd coached Little League with years earlier. I told him everything. After a long pause, he said, "Garrett, they've gotten sloppy." That was the first good news I'd had in a while. Bo found two things that changed the whole fight. First, under West Virginia law, the HOA had no authority to occupy private land outside a recorded easement without written consent. Second, buried in the HOA's own governing documents was language saying board members could be held personally liable if they acted outside their authority. Not just the HOA as a group, them, individually. Bo drafted a formal legal notice warning that any use of my property for that festival would be trespass, and that I was prepared to pursue damages, costs, and attorney's fees. I hand-delivered one copy to Dolores and mailed another to the HOA's registered agent. She responded with the same smug tone as always, saying the event fell under community activities, and my refusal to cooperate was being noted. That word bothered me more than it should have. Noted, like she thought she was documenting me, when really she was handing me proof she knew exactly what she was doing. I wish I could tell you the letter scared them off. It didn't. Festival day came, and by 9 in the morning my yard was already full. Trucks unloading tables. Kids running near my creek. A bounce house staked into my grass. Some man I'd never seen before wheeled a smoker across the edge of my lawn, like he was setting up at a county fair. I stepped out with my folder in hand and told the event coordinator, very calmly, that the land was private and everyone needed to leave. He gave me that helpless little shrug people use when they know they're wrong, but hope you'll take it up with somebody else. He pointed toward Dolores, who was standing under a rented tent in a sunflower yellow blazer, smiling like she was hosting a wedding. So I called the sheriff's department. Now, I know some people hear that and think maybe it was too much. But let me tell you something. When somebody keeps ignoring every polite boundary you set, eventually the next boundary comes a badge and a report number. 2 deputies showed up, listened to me, read the letter, checked the plat map Bo had marked up for me, and then walked over to Dolores. I'll never forget her expression. She started out offended, then confident, then sharp, then pale. The deputies made it clear that the HOA had no right to occupy my land, and if the event didn't move immediately, trespass complaints would be filed. On top of that, because the legal notice had already been served, this wasn't some misunderstanding. It was knowing interference with private property rights. And that was a twist Dolores never saw coming. The people she had bullied for years were watching. Doors opened up and down the street. Neighbors stepped out onto porches. Phones came up. A few of them started recording. And then Dale, my quiet neighbor Dale, walked over with copies of old HOA newsletters and photos showing the board had been using my lot for events for years. He had kept them, just in case. Turns out I wasn't the only one who had started documenting things. Once the deputies started asking direct questions, the board scattered fast. Tables got folded up. Parents grabbed kids. The bounce house deflated right there in the middle of my lawn, which, I'll admit, was deeply satisfying. There's something beautiful about watching inflated nonsense collapse under its own hot air. But it didn't end there. Bo helped me file for damages, not just for the lawn, but for repeated unauthorized use and retaliation. Once the board members realized they might be personally exposed, the whole brave little empire started cracking. Craig from Beautification suddenly wanted to say he had assumed permission had been obtained. Another board member claimed she had never read the easement language closely. Dolores, of course, tried to act like she had only been serving the community in good faith, which is a fancy way of saying she thought she'd never be challenged by somebody willing to read the paperwork. By November, the HOA's insurer had pushed for settlement talks. I ended up getting paid for the damage, reimbursed for legal costs, and given a written acknowledgement that my property was outside the HOA's event authority, except for the narrow maintenance easement already recorded. Better than that, a special meeting was called, and Dolores was voted out. I went to that meeting, sat in the back, and said almost nothing. I didn't need to. Her voice shook when people started reading the timeline out loud. The letters, the fines, the legal notice, the sheriff's visit, all of it. When the final vote came in, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not because anybody yelled, not because anybody humiliated her, just because the truth finally stood in the room where her attitude used to be. A week later, I stood on my porch in the cold with a fresh cup of coffee, looking out over my yard after the repairs were done. Grass coming back in, fence clean, quiet again. And I remember thinking how strange it is that power can look so solid right up until the second somebody asks it to prove itself. That whole mess taught me something I wish I'd learned younger. A lot of bullies don't actually believe they're strong. They just count on other people being tired, busy, intimidated, or too polite to push back. And sometimes the difference between being walked over and being left alone is nothing more dramatic than paperwork, patience, and a willingness to say, "No, this stops here." The last little piece of karma came a month later. The HOA had to hold its winter gathering in the clubhouse parking lot. Cramped and ugly, with no creek view, no extra room, no nice open space to spill into. I drove past it that evening, slow enough to see the folding chairs packed shoulder to shoulder and the sad little buffet table squeezed under fluorescent lights. Dolores wasn't there. And I'm not proud of this, but I did smile, because my yard was dark, quiet, and mine. So here's the question. When someone in power keeps crossing a line and hiding behind rules they made up in their own head, do you believe real justice is staying calm and following the process? Or does it only work because deep down, part of you enjoys watching karma hit back? Tell me what you think. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a board, or just one small tyrant with a clipboard, I'd love to hear your story too.